Many professionals experience an invisible weight the moment the alarm clock rings. Their limbs feel unusually heavy, and the prospect of facing the day brings a deep, unshakable exhaustion that sleep did not repair. Yet they push through and log on anyway. Occupational psychologists call this behavior presenteeism, the act of showing up to work and continuing to produce despite experiencing significant physical or psychological discomfort. In dense, high-pressure urban centers, this behavior is normalized. When the surrounding culture operates at the speed of a global marketplace, resting feels like falling behind, leading workers to interpret their own illness as a lack of discipline. For high achievers, working through exhaustion operates as a learned survival strategy. They rely on sheer willpower to bypass their biological limits, driven by an internalized belief that their personal value is directly tied to their continuous output. Clinical, precise. Medical consensus has evolved on this issue. The World Health Organization now officially classifies burnout not as a medical disease, but as an occupational phenomenon, a syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. By framing this state as an occupational injury rather than a personal failure, the clinical focus moves away from evaluating an individual's willpower. It places the responsibility directly on how the working environment itself is managed. The physical consequences of this environment are severe. Constant exposure to chronic workplace stress forces the human body to keep its fight or flight response permanently active. This chronic stress affects the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, a continuous feedback loop that regulates energy, now stuck in high gear. Over time, this overtaxed system begins blunting. Cortisol rhythms flatline, leading to mitochondrial exhaustion, where the body cannot generate energy efficiently. Patients present with diffuse migratory symptoms. They experience chronic muscle tension, jaw clenching, and persistent digestive issues. Often they seek treatment from multiple specialists for these distinct physical ailments. Because the sympathetic nervous system remains highly active even in this depleted state, people experience shallow breathing and racing thoughts at night. They are tired but wired. A standard weekend of rest cannot repair this deep energy generation failure. The sustained emotional strain hijacks the mind-body connection. The body mimics a variety of illnesses, using physical pain as a biological warning signal for unrelieved stress. This physiological drain quickly affects the brain. The accumulating load of daily choices induces decision fatigue, forcing a shift to impulsive or heuristic choices. Professionals describe experiencing a thick cognitive fog. Routine tasks that once felt effortless begin to take twice as long. Memory falters and execution errors increase because the prefrontal cortex lacks the resources to maintain sharp focus. Because the resulting emotional flatness looks so similar to major depressive disorder, psychiatrists look for specific environmental clues to determine if a patient is suffering from clinical depression or situational burnout. Clinical guidance from specialists at Kennedy Psychiatric points to a clear distinction between an occupational state and a distinct medical pathology. This chart visualizes a common diagnostic tool known as the vacation test. It tracks a patient's sleep, mood, and sense of professional efficacy during periods of high work demands compared to a 2-week period of total detachment. The results clarify the diagnosis. Burnout is highly context-dependent. If you remove the workplace stressor, the sleep and energy symptoms begin to lift. True clinical depression is context-independent, persisting regardless of the environment or time off. Getting this diagnostic distinction wrong has consequences. Attributing burnout to clinical depression often leads to unnecessary medication trials, while completely ignoring the structural workplace conditions that actually drive the physical and mental collapse. Organizations often prescribe resilience training as a cure. However, emphasizing individual toughness can become a trap, encouraging employees to mask their symptoms and maintain complicity with unsustainable systems instead of protecting health. In high-density professional environments, the workload is compounded by intense interpersonal demands. Pediatric nursing, for instance, requires immense emotional labor on top of complex clinical duties, making practitioners highly vulnerable to exhaustion. When health system policies or corporate structures prevent professionals from prioritizing their patients, they experience moral injury. They are forced to compromise their professional obligations to meet revenue targets. Addressing this requires unlearning old survival strategies. Healing starts by examining why a worker's self-worth is tied so tightly to performance, and gradually decoupling their personal identity from sheer productivity metrics. Tangible recovery relies on structural adjustments. This means restoring healthy sleep architecture, establishing true psychological detachment at the end of a shift, and enforcing strict boundaries around workload and availability. Workers also need robust interpersonal safety nets. Utilizing social support from family, relying on peer networks, and accessing emergency institutional resources are critical mechanisms to buffer against future occupational stress. The physical breakdown of burnout is the body's final alarm system. It's a biological signal indicating the environment itself, not the individual, requires a reset.